Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Continuous Testing Meetup online. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Depends on where you are. And I'm based in Berlin. So we are starting our meetup. So at first, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsors, Source Lab, Trendic, and To Amusement for helping us to organize this meetup. And a very big thank you to all organizers who provide and who help to do this meetup. So in case you passed our last events, please go to our website, continuoustestingmeetup.com. You will find all information there and also links to the video recording. So, and now we are go ahead. We have today John Hill from San Francisco with his topic, accessibility is testability. So, John, the stage is yours.
Great, thank you. So just a test. Can you all hear me right now?
Yeah.
Great. All right. Present. Start presenting. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna move that out of the way. Okay. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. Today, gonna talk about accessibility is testability. This is really important to me, not only because of how passionate I am about testability, but also kind of how I've learned about accessibility, and how there's a lot of overlap. So at the end of this meeting, you'll see it through my eyes, I think. And I'm here to kind of take you on my journey. So to talk a little bit about me, I've been doing web testing for about 15 years. Specifically, I've been working in the open source for a while. So worked at CloudBees, the Jenkins project, Ansible, under Red Hat, now IBM, and then whoever's going to buy IBM or whatever. Um, and then I had a really rare opportunity to work at NASA Ames Research Center on open source web testing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But now I had a really great opportunity to work at CrowdStrike doing kind of developer experience for UI test frameworks. So it's an ability for me to kind of like scale everything and help hundreds of engineers all at the same time. So it's a really great opportunity. And I'm also still working with the Playwright organization as a Playwright champion or ambassador. So it's me and a few other folks that are working with Microsoft to kind of like do this outreach, show Playwright, but also I just make sure that the community is successful. Also, K6. So K6 is a load testing tool, now a browser load testing tool. Super cool. Really recommend you check it out. All open source. So I would summarize myself as like I've been working in open source in a while, so I'm here to make the open source community better and more successful. So I said that I worked at NASA Ames Research Center and I worked on something called OpenMCT. So it's open source, so you can go check it out here on GitHub. I'd recommend that everybody go and star it if you can, just so you can keep track of it. It's a really great project, but it is open source. And what it is it's basically mission control software running in the browser. Traditionally, mission control software is run like on a thick client, like C Sharp or something like that on a Windows machine. But this is a project that's used in like dozens of ways and dozens of missions to do it all in the browser. There's lots of benefits to that. So you it, it, it there's lots of benefits to talk about. We won't go into them here. I'm not here to sell this, but what I want to talk about in the context of this call is that it is a framework. It is an open source framework that you can kind of see all the tests that are done. You can see the application. You can pull it down, play with it, contribute to it, right? So if it's truly open source, and it's fantastic. And this is kind of like a screenshot that I'm going to use now and later, but you can see what it kind of looks like here. You have your tree, you have a dashboard, right, of all the different things you'd want to see. This is a picture from the um, one of the Apollo missions, and then the data representing parts of the Apollo missions, basically. Um, and that, open source, take a look, play around. Pull it down, build it. It's a great project. So much so that it had this random there's a GitHub discussion, right? And it's an opportunity for people to show and tell what they've been working on. And then we had this day while I was there that basically this team came and said, "Hey, look at this thing that I built," right? So truly open source, right? So I had no idea about this. Let's see. What it was is they shared their use of OpenMCT. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is like the reigning champion of Formula One, Max Verstappen. And I'm going to pause it right here. He's not only is he great on the track, but off the track, right? He uses his team uses OpenMCT to kind of read telemetry data. And so he uses it to visualize telemetry data, which is super cool. It's open source and it's extensible, all of that jazz. It's truly a great framework to work with. And so I'm going to take this and then pivot to OpenMCT. I have it up locally, right? So I'm going to go and just kind of do a quick demo. I'm going to create. So here's OpenMCT running on my computer. I'm going to create a dashboard, kind of like Max has here, display layout dashboard, right? So you're all familiar with this, right? So there's like a search bar. There's nothing too crazy here. This is like a modal, right? I'm going to select this, right? And then click OK, save, right? There's an alert modal here. I'm going to create a gauge to represent data, representative data, right? I'm going to include a typo in it because why not? And then I'm going to save. So yeah, so this is a gauge, right? This is a way of representing data. This is a representative data layout. This is a gauge inside of it. So not it's fantastic, and I'm just going to use this kind of contextualize the rest of the talk, right? So in today's talk, we're going to talk about my journey. We're going to talk about web testability, accessibility, the lessons learned, and the future. So let's start a little bit with my journey here. So like I said, worked at Ansible Red Hat, and where I got started with kind of web accessibility and testability, um, kind of at scale was with the pattern fly redesign. So Red Hat needed to get everybody on the same page in terms of the visual language of what it meant to be using a Red Hat product. And so they open sourced the pattern fly design library, and they actually handled accessibility within it. So I was aware of accessibility and what it was, and aware of testability, but I didn't really have the control. But it was a good thing. It was taken care of it for me, right? It's a design library. All of the components were accessible or met the accessible rule set. And our team just kind of put them all together and made the Ansible web app, right? There was a Section 508 requirement at the time. For those of you who aren't familiar or maybe not in the US, the US federal law put into place a Section 508 requirement that dictated what it meant to have an accessible application for like US, web applications or websites, right? And this, obviously had a pretty big impact. It started to make it a accessibility kind of like a first class citizen, right? And a requirement, a legal requirement for website design. And I guess I should also say my journey has mostly been in the open source, right? So everything that I do has kind of been in that area. So all the tooling that I use, everything that I've done has all been open. The projects themselves have been open as well. But when I joined the OpenMCT team, I had a unique constraint that maybe not everybody else has, in that there are dozens of downstream consumers of OpenMCT, right? OpenMCT is an open source project, but Max Verstappen and the Oracle One Formula One team, they can make contributions here, but they have to package and distribute their own version of it here, right? So we're just one building block And so if they have testers downstream, right, then they do. I need to have a test strategy that serves upstream and downstream. They could have open and closed source plugins, right? It's an extensible, pluggable framework. So I may not even know, may not even be able to see what they're using. So this was presented a pretty big series of questions and challenges. Do I implement a page object model here? Right? Well, how does that work here? Do I implement data test IDs to make, as a test strategy to make the web app more testable? How does that work downstream? And it comes down to like some of the fundamental questions. What good is a page object model in JavaScript if the downstream testers are using Python Selenium, right? So I can have the most beautiful page object model in the world in the open source repo, but there's no way for them to consume that, right? What is a page, right? In the page object model, if everything is composable, right? I just showed you Max Verstappen's dashboard, right? That page is wildly different from what I just showed and built myself, right? So what is a page in that context, right? So do I mark up the entire web application with data test IDs everywhere, right? To make it so that the test can locate everything upstream and downstream. How do I enforce that, right? In a closed source, like how do I enforce that, right? So again, this is like the composable view, right? This is a series of a duplicate, right? We have a gauge here, gauge here, gauge here. This is all what you see is what you get. You build it and you assemble it yourself, right? So it's a kind of like a unique challenge. Um, so while all of that was happening, right, while I was trying to figure out like the general test strategy here, Playwright 1.27 landed, right? That doesn't matter to you all. I'm just trying to figure out how to describe kind of what this looked like. But they landed and they fundamentally changed the way that I wrote tests or that the industry wrote tests fundamentally changed it to match the way that one of the other Playwright ambassadors, Kent C. Dodd, recommended based off of the testing library. So like the React testing library. And that's all through user-facing locators. So what I have here is a button in OpenMCT code. What I have here is what a test looks like. See this? So a test is page locator. For those of you using Selenium, it's very similar. And this is for web, but basically you have a page and then you have a locator method and then you provide it some way of locating an object. So the the one way that people do it is they locate objects by the ID, create button label here. That's pretty good. Um, it's unique, or it's supposed to be unique, not always unique. A bad one is using the CSS class, right? And finding an element on the page, create button, create menu button, C button major, icon plus. Not that great, right? Not really human readable. It's subject to change, right? If somebody wanted to rename this class, the test would break because C button menu 2 or C button menu 3 is different, but the functionality is still there, right? That would break. That's not good. So what a lot of people do is they implement data test IDs, the thing I was talking about. Um, and then that kind of works, right? Data test ID equals create button. I'm in control as the tester. Um, and so that's kind of like the challenge, right? I could mark up the entire application or use the user-facing locators. So what you're looking at here is page get by role, and we'll talk about what a role is in a little bit. Button, right? You see the button, and then create the name of the object, right? So I didn't add data test IDs everywhere. I didn't use CSS. I didn't use IDs. I didn't use XPath, right? Kind of just went with this. So let me show you what this looks like in the context of Playwright. So I'm going to open up Playwright, npx Playwright, open. So the Playwright has an inspector tool, and I'm going to go to localhost 8080, right? And here I'm going to show you what the test would see. So you can write a test like this. Record, clicking on the create button. You see that? It says get by label, create exact true. And then you go down here and you get by label Gantt chart. Um, let's do gauge for consistency. Click on that, get by label title, and then modify this. And I'll just replace, right? And then get by label save, right? Then I have this object here. But what I'm really trying to show is that we have all of these user accessible attributes, labels and roles, right? That kind of are already part of the application, right? So I don't need, and this is kind of human readable. You know what this is doing, creating a gauge, um, replacing the title, right? And then saving, and then you have the get by role list item, right? So this is kind of human readable, and this is built in to all web applications, right? To support accessibility, but this is now the first class citizen in Playwright. So I just wanted to call that out because um, what if instead of marking up the entire app, I enforce user-facing locators with linting rules in the code? What if I disallow the page object model to force people to make better user-facing locators and more accessible, human-readable tests? And what if each time I write a test, I leave the app more accessible than I found it, right? So, so instead of tackling everything all at once, just every time I write a test, I make sure that the test is human readable and make sure that the create button label exists in a way that works, right? And what if I learn about accessibility along the way, right? So I also had the Section 508 requirement, right? Because of the federal law. And yeah, so what if I do that and it worked? So that was kind of my test strategy, right? That was the strategy. And please don't leave. I have a way more to talk about, right? But I just want to say, yeah, that was the general thought process I had. And kind of a confluence of events created this scenario, right? Of forcing me into this thing where I had to serve upstream and downstream. Playwright changed the way that the locators worked by default, right? And I had an accessibility requirement coming in. Um, so now we're going to talk a little bit about web testability. So I consider web testability, there's different definitions depending on your organization, but I define it as can my tests interact with the web page without a limitation or an asterisk? And that means can can I click on an element? Can I read the element state? Can I interact with it without having to have like a helper function to interact with it? Is the um, and this comes up a lot where you have this like weird way of interacting with something on your web page that isn't exactly as the user would, and that in my mind that's kind of like an asterisk. So I generally define testability as the ability to interact with the web page exactly as a user would in my tests. The second one is, can I read the web page contents or the state? Like, can I read what's going on in my tests? Like, do they have access to that information? Do I have to like go, like, I don't want to have to go to the read HTTP responses, right? Or query the backend or go into the database to know what the source of truth is or what's going on in the perspective of the test. Um, because I have an asterisk, right? I want to have the same kind of readability of content and state. And then this is a huge one, right? Can I uniquely identify elements on the page, right? So like if we think about back here, if there were multiple create buttons, right? If there were multiple create buttons, um, then the tests would fail and be flaky depending on the state of the test, right? So if you opened up the create modal here and there was another create modal here, your test wouldn't know which is the create button that was, fictionally here or the one that was here, right? They wouldn't know, and you would have to encode that into the test. Then you get this logic, then your page object model explodes into conditionals, right? It becomes a really big issue. So it turns out that web accessibility has almost exactly the same concerns. Can the assistive technologies that allow people with disabilities or, or low vision or blind, uh, can they interact with the page without limitations or asterisks, right? It's exactly the same. Can they read the web page content and state in a way that makes sense to the screen reader or the assistive tool? Exactly the same, right? Same requirements, right? One that's a little bit different is, can a low vision user discern the different components on the page visually, right? That's a little different, but turns out that it has some pretty good benefits that I'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, you see how the requirements are kind of the same? The testability requirements and the web accessibility requirements. It turns out they also need to have unique elements on the page. There should have been a fourth bullet point here. Web accessibility users need to know what's truly unique and what they're actually trying to do, right? So demoing screen readers is really, really, really hard in the Zoom calls. So um, I recorded a video of me using a screen reader on my machine, right? And so what I'm going to do is the screen reader will tell you what it's doing, right, in real time, and it'll tell you what you've selected, how you got there, right, and what your options are for working with it. So I'm going to show you what a screen reader sees in OpenMCT. Uh-oh. I can't move the draw button. Zoom. Ah, sorry guys. I'm going to have to do this not full screen.
Browse bar my items grid view. Empty table. Chrome. Back. My items grid.
So I'm going to pause right there. I am, I have the screen reader running. I am using the screen reader on OpenMCT. This is the voiceover app for Mac. They're not all the same, but there's one for every platform, Windows or whatever. And what you're looking at here is it's reading to me as if I was a low vision or blind user, what my options are, right? So look at this. It's telling me that where I am, right? I'm over the create button and it's got it highlighted here. And now I am personally tabbing through this. I'm personally tabbing through this.
View. Search input.
See right there? I tabbed, so which is a way of navigating without a mouse. So, with screen readers and assistive technologies, you need to basically get rid of your mouse and be able to navigate through a web application. So right here it says search input, search text field, open MCT search search. That tells the screen reader, what is possible, but also telegraphs to the user what they're doing and what they can do. And so a search role is like a unique thing. And so there's and the fact that I tabbed from here to here has to do with the kind of the order of what is important, right?
Search create button group.
So right there, I hit the enter key, popped open the thing, the menu item list, and then I'm going to go and click on gauge. But it's telling me you are currently on a button, right?
You are currently on a button.
Right? So it tells me what's going on.
Group inside of example modal overlay 2. Unnamed gauge. G E. Edit text. Fill dial. Display 2. Float precision. Check search input. Search text field.
So here you go. Remember how we talked about uniqueness on the page? Look, there are two search bars here, right? There are two search bars. There's one in the background and one in the foreground. Now, HTML knows that this one is disabled, and HTML knows that this one is in focus. From a testing standpoint, there's not necessarily a way to know the difference. So when marking up your application for accessibility reasons, you also have the same testability concerns right here, right? So this is a search input search text field that's different from the OpenMCT search text field, right?
You are currently on a text field. To enter text in this field, M Y M I T E M save button. You are currently at gauge. Web content. Save successful.
Right there. So the last thing I want to show in this demo, when I finished, look at what happened. When I finished saving, look what happened. I hit OK. I hit enter.
Are currently at gauge.
Right there. Right. Save successful. Listen for this. So it told me I transitioned out of the modal into the gauge, right?
Web content saved.
Save successful dismiss. That's the alert. So part of what happens when we're talking about telegraphing information to the user, there's an alert modal that we had to add basically additional precedence to telegraph to the user that's available, right?
If successful, dismiss 0%.
And it's gone. So it's gone. So that telegraphing of information with the alert modals is a protected thing, and it's an industry standard that we had to figure out. But I just wanted to call out those things. So that's a lot, but I just wanted to show kind of like what the screen reader looks like and how this relates back to testing and the user-facing locator. So remember how we were talking about all of this? So the create button that we looked at earlier, right, was something that the screen reader read back to us, remember? It said create button and it told you what your options were when you got to use with it, right? Um, so that's one aspect of this. I want to show you all kind of the other aspect of this. So there's this tool called Wave. Really cool. It allows you to like audit your web page and get contextual links as to what you're doing to violate the rule set. I would recommend that everybody that's interested in accessibility use it if you're not already. So it's a Chrome plugin, right? I clicked this button, right? And now I have all of the contextual information about uh, what's going on here. Look at this. And zero errors. We did it, right? So there are no problems here because there are no violations, right? And this is what you would use for that. And it gives you kind of details. I'm going to turn them off so that I can show you the functionality that we need to talk about next. Um, there's structure, right? The structure defines what happens in order, right? So remember, I tabbed from the create button to the thing. That definition uh, is not necessarily a violation, but that is made available to the screen readers and the web accessibility testing tools like Wave. So you can see like the structure here, right? What you can do and what it knows to do, and the order here. Create button search. Remember, we jumped from when I was navigating through, we jumped from the create button to the search input button, right? We jumped, and that's based off of the order, right? But the thing I want to show you right now is what the screen reader view of a web application is, and assistive technology view is, right? So this is the best way I know to do it. Watch this. I'm going to turn off styles. So it turns out that CSS, one of the fundamental parts of web application development, is totally invisible to web accessibility assistive tools. Totally invisible. In fact, this is what the OpenMCT looks like, right? So I'm going to hit the create button by tabbing, right? Do you see that? That might be hard to see. I'm going to go back and hit the create button. See that? I'm highlighting this. This is a working application. When I hit enter, I've opened up the create modal down here, right? These are all the objects, right? But you can see there's an issue here. There's an issue with OpenMCT in that when you hit the create modal, the precedence order jumps back out, and the options here are not necessarily selectable. But I've now clicked manually on the gauge. Look at that. Remember the modal, right? Here's the modal, right? This is what the screen readers this is their view of the world. So I'm going to save, and then I'm going to turn it back on. Look, we've created a new gauge without CSS. We've created it just using what the assistive tools see. So I'm going to turn off Wave and demo one more thing here. Oops, well, that's fine. I'm going to, so we were looking at the developer tools. Can you all see this? Is this too small? I don't know how to make this larger. Is this too small for you all on the call? Anybody?
A little.
Yeah, let me see if I can make it. I don't know if I can make it bigger.
Unless you increase the resolution of your computer, I think it will be hard.
There we go. Aha. Okay, cool. All right, so here, right? So this is the DOM, right? This is what we test, right? Here's all of the components in the DOM. So I bet I can find the button. Where is it? Um, Desktop landscape. Yeah, I bet I can find the create button. Yeah, let me find it like this. Watch. Why isn't that working? Anyways, I'll just do this one. But yeah, you see this? Ah, here it is. Here's the create button, right? So this is what we were looking at earlier in the test. Here's the create button. The other thing to talk about is we talked about like when you disable CSS, what do you see? Well, it's also possible to get another view of this here. This is called the accessibility tree view. This is recently added to Chrome, but I'm going to show you what the screen reader has access to and assistive tools have access to by clicking this little guy. Boom. So you see this? This is you basically take a really overly complicated DOM and strip it down to what's basically interactive here. The create button. It's focusable, right? It has text inside of it, create. You have search, right? It's focusable, settable, right? All of this stuff is defined here in a way that it's clearly, stripped down to the core of what's interactive. And turns out this is all that tests really care about, right? Look at this. Can you create this button? Can you interact with this button? What happens when you do, right? This is like a simplified view of what the world of the test would see, right? So it gets rid of all the noise of the DOM, right? If I flip the DOM back on, look at this. It's just a lot of like classes and just garbage, right? It's just so much, too much for for me to read. But for the tests, it's very easy to see how it'd be great to have like a simplified view. And the simplified view is the web accessibility tree view. And this is important for the future. So just remember all of that. So let me go back to the test. Um, so in terms of accessibility and the patterns, right? The locators, the ability to work with things, usually already exist in HTML5. So a button is a thing that's existed since probably before all of us were born, or maybe half of us were born, right? Uh, it's been around since like the 80s or the early 90s or whenever the browsers were basically set, right? HTML semantics for a button, right? But there are new ones to fill in the gap, right? So that matter to assistive technology. So one of them I showed like the gauge we're going to talk about here in a second. There is a role, an ARIA role to fill in the gap because there's no HTML thing called meter yet. There might be in the future, but there's a pattern for everything. Um, and then for everything that's additionally missing or anything you want to work with, you can add labels, right? So you can add ARIA labels that tell the screen reader what they can do with it. So there's like a create button label. And I'll talk about this at the end. This can be abused and overused, but um, something to bring up here. In accessibility patterns, we want everything to be uniquely identifiable. Remember the search button, the search bar? There were two of them. One of them was out of focus, one of them was in focus, right? We need everything to be uniquely identifiable for the accessibility tools, right? So that you know what search bar you're searching in. So let's go and just there's too much to talk about here, so let's focus it into a gauge, right? Um, so like look at this. So here's the gauge. So here's the gauge code right here and the test code. And then let's look at what we built here. So we have the gauge that we built together, right? And then we have Max Verstappen's gauge, right? That's what he built. Um, and what that looks like in the view code, right, is you have the ARIA label is the gauge title, a wild or alias to whatever the object is that he created. So you can access that label as kind of like the name. So it's Max Verstappen too fast, right? Let's just say that's maybe he has a big ego, right? That's what he would have there. But it has the meter role, right? So I added the roll meter to this gauge component And then it became possible to kind of access these this component uniquely in a test, right? So he has one, two, three gauges. So you have one, two, three ways of uniquely identifying something in the test. So each of them has a unique name, but has a unique role meter. So if you had another component on the page that said Max Verstappen too fast, like maybe that was his display layout that he created, you would have conflicts in your test. You wouldn't know what you're trying to select. You'd have conflicts in your screen reader trying to figure out what they're going to work with or what's being represented. So by having these roles, you add the level of specificity, but you also get additional metadata. So this is what I wanted to talk about. It's more than just locating, right? There's additional metadata that comes here. So this value here is 0. And so when you think about in testing, you want to test that uh, a newly created gauge has 0 to 100 as the defaults, right? That's a valid test case. This is what it would look like, where you have your gauge defined here. You have access to these ARIA attributes, these accessible attributes that are also read by screen readers to tell you what the minimum range is. This is not totally like fictional markup. This is, protected markup that's existed for years to describe what a meter has for the lowest value. And then you could see here the highest value, the current value, right? So your tests now, in addition to be able to uniquely identify everything on the page and get information about them, your tests now also can, access the metadata that really matters for tests. We want to make sure that the value is 0, that the value is 100, that the current value is dash dash, right? Or in Max Verstappen's case, that we want to make sure that maybe he has a WebSocket connection and the latest value is 294. We want to make sure that in his tests or his team's tests that they can do to have attribute ARIA value now is 294. You see what that would look like there? You see that? So there's additional benefit here. It's not just uniquely interacting. There are protected first order metadata that you map for screen readers, but also you can leverage in your testing. So taking it one step further, here's kind of like the like a Venn diagram view of everything, where you have accessibility over here and you have testability over here. What's unique here is unique to accessibility, what's unique to testability requirements, but what's in the middle is where there's the overlap, right? So visual testing, do you have contrast violations is usually in the concern of accessibility. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Keyboard navigation, right? That's not really important to test. Like what you do next doesn't really matter, right? And so remember when I jumped from the create button to the search, eh, it's not really that important for testing, right? Um, Key presses being recognized and telegraphed to the user correctly, it's not really that important to test, right? But it's important to accessibility rules, right? Tab ordering, like am I tabbing through things correctly? Is that important? No, not for tests, right? Alert urgency? No, not really. Um, I mean, you could probably make the case that when you hit tab, you and you're typing something, you would maybe want to make sure that you can continue typing in the search bar and that the alert modal doesn't obstruct it, right? That's one thing. Um, and then for the testability, like there's certain mouse interactions that aren't really appropriate for there's certain interactions that don't really mean anything for accessible users. Double clicking is kind of one of them, right? It's not really important what happens when you double click on an object. Um, but really that doesn't really have any world use case really in web development anyways. CSS class names, none of that matters, right? Class CSS is totally invisible to accessibility in terms of like outside of the visual testing, right? Remember we looked at Wave and how it all just disappeared. And then there's certain browser events that also don't matter, right? There's just certain things that don't matter, right? But The good thing is there's a crazy amount of overlap, right? So everything needs to be uniquely identifiable, right? We need to make sure that there are no nth order. You don't want to have three create buttons, right? And you click on the third create button, or you don't want to be in your test, you don't want to be clicking on the third object in the dropdown, right? You don't want that. You want to be able to clearly identify creating a gauge. You don't want to be clicking on the fourth item in a list, right? And both, accessibility cares about that and testability cares about that, right? Human readable tests, right? Human readable tests is huge. Being able to read what's being, effectively interacted with is huge, right? Being able to know what's going on without having to have multiple browse IDE code blocks open so you can read the POM. Well, this means this. Oh, wait, what's the state? Have another another view up in VS Code of like this is what this really meant when you did this in this test, right? You need to have human readable elements in your tests. And then you have metadata, right? Like we looked at the gauge, right? You need that in your test. You need to test that when you create a new gauge, it starts at 0 and ends at 100, right? You need to test that when you have 294 in Max Verstappen's view that's what the current value is. So
Okay, I need to interrupt because
go
there is
ahead.
one
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
Okay, so Assad was
Yeah, please.
asking how can we scale this to the mobile app testing?
Yeah, so mobile really has kind of the same concerns. So, do you mean mobile web or just mobile testing in general? I can't see the comments. Let me see if I can pull up the chat. Do you mean scale for mobile for Assad? So, do you mean the mobile app or do you mean mobile Chrome? So, I guess yeah, I guess I'll answer it both ways. So, there are some locator strategies that are different in mobile uh, and uh, and desktop. So like I'll just show you one. Like right here. Do you see that? When you hover over something, show selected item in tree. Do you see that? That's called an HTML title, right? And that's been around forever. That's not mobile. So mobile has no concept of title because your thumb never hovers over this button and then gets the feedback of what's being selected underneath. So you would want to, and it turns out that screen readers don't read titles either necessarily. They sort of can, but they really shouldn't. So like when you're designing like a pattern here, you should avoid using titles in your tests. You should avoid using titles in your app so that it can be accessible and testable on desktop and browser. I hope that answered the question.
There is another one getting the occasion for asking, are XPaths good as a locator for testing?
Um, yeah. So we mean testing through. Yeah, exactly. So to answer the question, yeah. So there are just some things, and this is scalable. This does work for mobile testing and the web application or website testing. Are XPaths good as a locator for testing? No. So XPath is kind of like there's a hierarchy here. So clicking on this create button or clicking on an element in here is highly dependent on the DOM order, not the accessible tree order. So, or clicking on gauge right here depends on the number of objects that are in here, the order of them, like the way that this is being constructed to a user, right? And so when you write a test that clicks on something with XPath, you end up writing a test that is flaky. But if you write a test that uses the web accessibility properties here, you write a test that will last as long as the application doesn't fundamentally change, right? So that's one of the great things about accessibility locators. They don't have an order necessarily. They just have what's available here. Now, if the team were to change what gauge text was, right, it would impact both the accessible experience and it would impact the testing experience, right? So that's where maybe the data test ID would be a better locator strategy, right? But that sort of dynamic change is not really a great experience, but it is possible. Yeah. So that's where maybe data test IDs would be appropriate. Um, cool. I think that's some of them. And then I'll have more time at the end to take more general questions as well. Is it okay if I jump back into the presentation?
Yep.
Okay. So in addition to there's contrast, like is a whole world of contrast. So making it so that people that are low vision can be able to clearly differentiate objects on the page. Like you can see this is gray on gray on gray on gray on gray on gray on gray, different shades of gray, right? And so in order to improve it, right, we the floor of what was dark, of what was the background, went darker, right? The we went to black up here versus almost black here. That gave us more contrast, gave us more dynamic areas to make it possible to have the contrast, right? And then you can see how this kind of took shape kind of all over the place. So all of the colors became a little bit more contrasty, right? And it just kind of became easier to work with, right? It became easier to understand what's going on. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. There's unexpected benefits. So mission operators benefited from visual clarity improvements. They noticed when we started implementing contrast improvements, right? They could see things clearly on their screen, right? That was a huge benefit. Totally unexpected. Another one is we migrated from Angular to Vue 2 to Vue 3 without a lot of churn. So it turns out that user-facing locators means that there's less of a coupling between the app and what the tests do. So the tests didn't need to be changed when the underlying frameworks changed, right? But if they had been more ingrained with data test IDs or XPath or properties, right, the interpretation of properties, there would have been a tighter coupling between the app implementation and the test implementation. But because we used user-facing locators meant that we could do rapid changes. As long as the button still worked, right? That's all that mattered. Um, and then another benefit was it was easier to onboard with the native Playwright locator playground. So by adding more like testability concerns and accessibility concerns, objects in this view, right, were a little bit. You saw me write the test here. That became a little bit easier. So it became easier to write tests. Actually, it did become easier to write tests. It's very quick to just do this, right? It's pretty incredible actually. A good experience. And then there were other things, right? So like when I started to find clashes, like when here's an example where there were multiple ad buttons available on the page, right? There were multiple ads in the context of this page. Here's on the right, here's on the left. It became an opportunity to make it actually easier to understand what the thing was supposed to be doing, what the web app was supposed to be doing. In this case, in this view, we were adding a drawing object, and it wasn't really clear in the original user experience, right? That we were adding contextually a drawing object. It could have been like for somebody who didn't have a lot of context, like yourselves, it didn't. This add button, it's not clear what would actually happen when you clicked on it or what the intent was, right? Not really a good experience. And I'm not even talking about testing or accessibility. Just we've improved the experience. So what by implementing this um, add drawing object, the tests were a little bit clearer to understand what was going on, and the accessible user, right, could understand that they were adding a drawing object. So kind of cool. Some additional lessons learned. Don't hesitate to do this yourself. Like it's not that hard. It really isn't that hard. It's not like real web development. I don't know what else to say. It's not really isn't that hard, and there's a lot of people out there that are willing to help you and have some great articles. So if you want as a tester to add testability to your app, try it through accessibility. You're going to have fewer people that are like telling you no, because especially in the EU, there's a big thing coming through where it's not going to be part of the law. And don't try to boil the ocean here. Like that was the big thing is don't try to do everything all at once. Just do it piecemeal. Every test I wrote was a little bit better than the last one, and I took things in that way, right? Working on one component, one page, one object, one label at a time, right? And it's important because I didn't know when I started all of the rules, right? My journey, remember how I talked about Patternfly? All this was solved for me. I had to learn all of this up. I had to basically build the plane while I was flying it. And it took about 2 years with 50% of myself working on this kind of on the side. It was about 50%. I was so maybe about one year worth of work of doing it otherwise, and it depends. So if you have 4 people doing it full time, you maybe do it in a month, right? It wasn't that much because a lot of it already existed, right? A lot of the accessibility work it depends on some of the HTML properties like button. Um, but I wish I would have shared what I was learning with the developers more regularly while I was doing it and saying like, hey, this is the pattern I think that we should have been using all along. I just didn't do that, and I wish I had done that because then they would have been less likely to go down a different route with a different accessibility pattern. But the big thing mistake I made was I did too many ARIA labels. So look at this test, and you'll see it here, right? I don't know if you noticed, but it says create by label create, right? There's too many. I did too much markup with ARIA labels. The screen reader is fine, right? You heard the screen reader, it still did it fine. That's because the screen reader always does roles over labels, right? So it's fine. The accessibility experience isn't that bad. And I've removed this from most of the tests, but yeah, like the labels, I overdid it. So I added too many ARIA labels. So don't do that. Don't do that. Um, and ARIA really implies interactivity. So like ARIA means this is interactive, which doesn't apply to everything. Not everything's interactive, right? Not everything is meant to be interactive. And the big thing is this approach doesn't mean you pass an audit at the end. You still have an experience. Remember when I did the create button and then the drop down disappeared? It was out of view, right? That's because it's not a good experience. It'll pass an audit, which it has, but it's not a great experience. So just kind of keep that in mind that this approach of testability and accessibility doesn't kind of get you there. So just to talk quickly about the future. Um, the future is AI. I mean, you've probably seen this a million different ways. And it's funny because Playwright's version of the way that they want people using their tool to work with you know, to work in this world is using the accessibility tree. So when you use Playwright in AI, right? When you use the MCP server, it actually uses the accessibility tree to define what the test can do. It's really crazy and funny that it worked out this way. So that view of the accessibility tree of what the test can do and what the application can do is interpreted this way. So you can write an AI-based test with Playwright that says, go to the home page and create a gauge and verify min value, right? You can do that. You can write a AI-based test in Stagehand or whatever that uses the MCP protocol, Claude or whatever, right? And if you did that and you targeted OpenMCT, it would know what to do because it knows about the accessibility tree and the accessibility tree is valid and it uses that to figure out what it meant by go to the home page, what it meant by create a gauge, and then what it meant to verify min value, right? Isn't that crazy? So like that's how this is going. That's how this all works. So kind of like just to go into conclusion here, if we're going to implement a locator strategy for tests, it should be user-centric, stable, and specific. Accessibility checks all of those boxes, all of them. And so if you're going to take the time to improve the testability of your app, focus on accessibility instead of XPath, CSS, ID, and data test ID. Just go ahead and do it. The payoff is there. And at the end of it, you're going to learn a lot. And even if you don't care about the altruistic nature of helping low vision and accessible users, like you're going to have a more testable app at the end of it all. So you have better tests, better app, better testers. You can do more refactoring. It works for AI now. And the only con is localization. I'll take questions on that. But that's kind of it. Thank you all for your time, and I'm open to any questions.
All right. I will start then. People, if you want, you can unmute yourself directly and you can ask directly. My question is, how important do you think HTML validity is in creating an effective, accessible test strategy?
Yeah. So for me, it's critically important because if you if you want your app to survive refactoring and you want your test to be seen culturally as not flaky, right? This is the way to do it. And if you need ammunition to make changes to your application to make it more testable, then you have your accessibility needs and your testability needs. And because of some of the laws coming through, let's see if I can. Um, so Europe Accessibility Act, right? Look at this. So the Accessibility Act is coming June 28th. No, no, no. Anyways, there's an Accessibility Act that's coming into view this year that's going to require European websites to have the same legal requirement as the US ones did, right? So it's happening. It's all coming into view, right? It's all happening soon. So there's testability concerns, accessibility concerns, and now legal concerns that your app must be testable in this way.
Nice. Thank you. So do you want to unmute yourself? I will read the first one because I don't know who is that person. Can user-facing locators be used for testing a multilingual websites?
Aha. See, there you go. Yes, that's the issue, right? So that's the con here. There's the con. Yeah, so the answer is sort of. So you that is the con here. So if you have to do a lot of that work, it is a con. So you don't necessarily, because it's very human readable, that's readability is dependent on your language. So um so the way we did this at Ansible was actually we aliased all of the accessibility text within the tests. So because the test sat alongside the application, right, we could actually access dynamically what the translated text was going to be, right? So that was one way we could do it in different languages. But yeah, that is the limitation there. You would have basically the English way of testing your application, and then you would have the Spanish, Japanese, German version of your application tests as well. But your accessibility also kind of follows that, right? The way that, that it all works also has to be accessible in the different languages. So that is the con, yeah.
Cedric, do you want to unmute yourself for the question?
I will
Okay.
try. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. My question is about the process on your team regarding the labels on the accessibility. You're based on very bunch of label, but if you have a team which is don't care about the label and change it every week, how can you manage this kind of behavior?
Yeah, so culturally, you're saying that the team may not care about accessibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so now it is becoming a legal requirement. And so if they don't care about accessibility and they don't care about testability, you may want to hit them with a legal angle, right? That this is going to matter. But really, if they want to have a job in 5 years, right? That's the other aspect of this. Like accessibility isn't going away. It's only becoming more reinforced, like I showed in the AI example. So if they want to have marketable skills going forward, they need to understand this. They will get passed over for other candidates that don't know how this all works. This is like saying this is like saying you want to be a front-end developer, but you don't want to touch CSS at this point, right? That's basically where
Mhm.
we're at.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and yeah. Any other questions? Sorry if that was like too uh, pointed, but yeah, it is a cultural problem.
It's not a question, more some conversation regarding the validity that I was mentioning earlier. So Aral is mentioning Playwright matcher. Please check the chat and tell your thinking about this suggestion.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so the I said it was open source. So there's one of the things we found was that accessibility violation tooling out there is actually kind of weird. So most accessibility violation tooling is not worried about the dynamic nature of websites. So like right here, an accessibility audit won't necessarily run a scan when you do this, right? It won't necessarily validate that this passed, right? This is an open dropdown, right? And so unless a audit is run at this point in time, right? It was if you go and look, like I said, it's all open source. What we found putting out this in this meeting, but we can talk about it now. Or sorry, in the flow of the presentation. But basically, what we did was every time we ran a visual check, right, to check ability check, right? So let's see what that looks like right here. You see this? After each, we would run an accessibility violation check using the Axe core Playwright package. So never fell out of compliance because the tests would run for the visual tests and they would run the accessibility tests and run them in all the different permutation and weird parts of the app, right? So a lot of the times, and again, I think the rule of thumb is automated accessibility testing, even when perfect, running it really can only detect like 70%. So you still need a manual audit. You still will need one, but this is a way of being evergreen, right? This is a pattern of being evergreen. Take your accessibility tests that scan for violations and run them with your visual tests, and you're going to catch everything. Everything will be caught. It's kind of like a silver bullet. Yeah, so Pally is good, but Pally suffers from the same thing. So Adam, Pally suffers from the same thing. It doesn't it doesn't interact with it, right? And that's really what tests do. Playwright does. It interacts with the web page, right? So you'll pass a Pally audit on this page, but it might not pass. You may not have been able to detect anything violations on here. So like, look, see how this like rolls off. Um, you know, there's a lot here. So this is visually interesting, right? A visual test wants to know that the generator with ac doesn't give you the acknowledgement thing, right? It doesn't even have the ellipsis, right? A visual test is interested, so you could see how that would be interesting to an accessible test. So like there's some weird ones that like when you click on like there were certain weird violations that cropped up depending on like if you had this open, then you had this overlaid like the contrast violation here. You see that? There were a lot of violations that happened that were just impossible to get to because they were kind of in the nooks and crannies. Yeah, just go to No, just go to OpenMCT. Yeah, it's on the thing. Just go to OpenMCT. It's right. It's all open source. Just take a look. There's documentation. I wrote it, so it's not good, but it's there.
There is another question just before about PA11Y at C stage.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, so Pally is deficient in that you're not going to get into the nooks and crannies. That's what I was referring to is Pally. It doesn't get you in the nooks and crannies like you would want to have. You'll pass a Pally audit, you won't pass a real audit. And so one of the ways to get around it is to do that.
Okay, any other question, folks?
Yeah. So just to close, go star this repo. Go check it out, pull it down, play with it, run the tests, contribute tests, right? Do everything you can. Tell your friends. Go tell Max Verstappen's competitor. OpenMCT might be the key to winning.
So thank you, John. So I will start with a ramp up this session. So what's going next? In the middle of May, 14th of May, we already planned our next meetup with Pallavi Sharma and her topic, the Test Automation Toolbox, exploring frameworks built on WebDriver, their API for browser automation. So I hope to see you there middle of May and have a nice evening. And I hope you enjoyed this session and see you next time. Bye-bye.